Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now in today's video, we're gonna have a little bit of fun. Most of you who watch my channel know that I love using movies to talk about spiritual philosophy. And in honor of Frozen 2 coming out last month, my girlfriend and I decided to rewatch the original movie before seeing the sequel in theaters. And I hadn't seen the original movie in probably 3 or 4 years, but the first time I watched it in 2013, the ending scene struck me so hard that I found myself sitting in the theater with tears coming down my face. And I didn't really understand why it hit me so hard at the time, but after rewatching it all these years later, the message became crystal clear, and there really are so many hidden gems in this movie. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, I typically give a spoiler alert before I talk about movies on my channel, but Frozen came out 7 years ago, and if you haven't seen Frozen yet, I mean, come on. So as many of you are already aware, I'm sure, Frozen has a much deeper message underneath it than most people realize. For the simple fact that if you haven't done any inner healing work on yourself, then you wouldn't be able to see it. But one of the reasons I'm such a huge Disney fan is because a lot of the movies they make have very deep spiritual undertones. And in my opinion, Frozen is their best work in this regard. And although they do a great job at not making it too obvious, they also do a great job at ensuring that you will feel the message whether or not you intellectually grasp it. And as I mentioned a minute ago, when I first saw this movie back in 2013, I hadn't done any shadow work yet in my life, so I couldn't quite put my finger on why it impacted me so much. But now, let's take a closer look at the real story that Frozen is telling. The story begins with two sisters named Elsa and Anna. Like any good Disney movie, Elsa and Anna are princesses who live in a castle that rules the kingdom of Arendelle. Princess Elsa possesses magical powers to create ice with her hands. To the innocence of a child, there's nothing wrong with this special gift, and Elsa loves this part of herself. She and her sister play with Elsa's powers until one day she pushes things a little too far and wounds her little sister. This represents the first trauma that we experience around a specific part of us, where we learn to associate that aspect of ourself as bad. For whatever reason it is, whether through the abuse of another or self-inflicted harm, we begin to see that aspect of us as unacceptable or unlovable. And so our relationship with ourself begins to change. For the first time, we see something dark within us, and that part of us seen as negative gets banished into the shadow of our psyche. As the story progresses, it shows Elsa wearing gloves to cover her hands, to ensure that her dangerous powers don't inflict any more harm on others. This part of the story represents suppression. Rather than accepting it and learning how to have a healthy relationship with that part of us, we cover it up and repress it from expressing at all. As the story continues, Elsa begins to lose control of her suppressed powers. When she can't control the anger she feels for having to hide that part of herself, she lashes out and loses control of her powers again. Whenever we try to hide a part of ourselves from the world, all we do is cause it to express itself in its lowest possible vibration. And this is what happens to Elsa in this scene. This experience reinforces the belief that something really is wrong with her, and so she flees to the mountains to spend the rest of her days in isolation. This represents the extreme self-hatred and rejection that comes from years of hating different parts of us. As the story continues, Elsa reaches the mountains and sings the famous song, Let It Go. This song represents the first stage of shadow work, where you begin to change your relationship with your shadow side. You learn to begin accepting it, and letting go of the resistance you once held towards it for so long. The opening verse of the song says, "Don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know." And here she begins to change her relationship with that part of her shadow. Instead, she begins to sing,
Let it go, can't hold it back anymore.
This is when the first breakthrough of inner healing happens. You eventually become so exhausted from holding that part of yourself back that you begin to change your relationship with it from rejection to acceptance. The second verse says, "It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small, and the fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. This represents us becoming aware of parts of our shadow. Once we bring awareness to our shadow for the first time, that awareness creates distance between us and the self-rejection. We're able to begin seeing it for what it is. And we recognize that it was never that part of us that was the problem, but our fears about it. And once we see fear for what it is, it loses its ability to control us. In the last verse of the song, Elsa says, "And one thought crystallizes like an icy blast. I'm never going back, the past is in the past." A very important part of the healing process is recognizing that we must let go of the past, because all the past can ever do is cause us pain. The ego finds its sense of self from the past, and this is the only reason we reject any aspect of ourselves. We do not see it as it is now. We only see it through the stories of the past. So in summary, all healing can be seen as a release from the past and an ushering in of the present moment. So Elsa finishes the song with the famous line, "The cold never bothered me anyway." And what this line represents is that your true self has never been bothered by anything. And this is the part of herself that Elsa's beginning to get in touch with. Your true self is love, which means it can only accept everything unconditionally. It's only the ego that seeks to label aspects of us as not okay. And this is because the ego survives on identities. No identity, no ego. So when something happens in our life that challenges one of these identities strongly enough, the ego seeks to quickly abandon it in hopes that it won't be discovered as an illusion. So because our true self is incapable of hating anything, the feelings of self-hatred we have towards any part of ourself is actually the feelings of self-hatred that the ego has about itself for not living up to its self-images. And this is why the ego is a contradiction. It creates these self-images and then creates feelings of hatred and self-loathing towards them in hopes that we will treat them like a hot potato. The ego wants us to quickly discard these parts of ourselves into the shadow without taking the time to really look at them. So for this reason, healing the shadow can be simplified as looking at parts of ourselves that we had not truly seen before. Pure awareness can only look upon anything with acceptance and never with rejection. So as long as we are rejecting a part of us, that means we're not truly looking at it yet. It means that there's still a filter or a label being placed on top of it. So whenever we heal something, we're actually only healing our perception of it, but never the thing itself. There is nothing wrong with you and nothing that needs to be fixed, but only to be put back into balance again. And so by accepting every part of us, we begin to exalt those characteristics to their highest expression. Self-acceptance is an ongoing practice that you cannot rush or expect to complete overnight. So as often as you feel resistance towards any part of yourself, whether that's your anger or your insecurity or something that embarrasses you, you must meet these parts of yourself with loving awareness. Be completely innocent of judgment and allow it to be and express itself exactly as it is. And doing this is how you transcend self-rejection. And this truth is showcased perfectly by what I think is the best hidden gem in this movie, and that is Olaf. Olaf's character serves as the comic relief of the movie. On the surface layer, Olaf is warm and funny and helps keep the movie lighthearted. But on a deeper level, Olaf's character is very intriguing for one particular reason. Olaf is enlightened. I have a video which touches on this subject, but in short, the way that A Course in Miracles teaches enlightenment is through the concept of innocence, returning again to the childlike perception of awareness before concepts and labels. The Course says, "Innocence is wisdom, for it is unaware of evil, and evil does not exist." No matter what Olaf goes through in the movie, whether running from an evil snow monster, falling off a cliff, or even dying at the end of the movie, he never suffers. His outlook is always jovial and carefree, because his perception is too innocent to suffer, and so regardless of what outcome he's faced with, he accepts it happily. Olaf's character beautifully captures the essence of spiritual liberation and how the enlightened mind perceives reality. Everything is looked upon with loving eyes, and so nothing that is seen can create suffering. This is also evidenced by Olaf's love for summer, even though he doesn't know what summer means. When he finally does meet fire for the first time, he reaches out longingly to touch it, unaware of what is about to happen, and then he says the most amazing line in the movie.
I love it. Ooh, but don't touch it.
Love it, but don't touch it. The totality of shadow work is summarized in this one phrase. Love every part of your shadow, but don't feed into any of its drama or stories. Don't touch any definition the ego gives it, positive or negative. Allow it to simply be as it is, and don't seek to try and change it, because trying to change it implies that you're defining it as negative. Nothing about you needs to be changed. It simply needs to be allowed the freedom to express itself. And as we allow these parts of us to express, they grow and mature until they are finally exalted to their highest expression and put back into balance with the self. And finally, the closing scene of the movie encapsulates the whole message of healing. The movie sets up the plot in order to make you think that the act of true love that will save Anna is true love's first kiss. This is the cliché image of ultimate fulfillment that every Disney movie saves for last. But in a plot twist, Anna abandons her only chance to save herself and instead chooses to sacrifice herself to save her sister. Since Elsa poisoned her heart with ice, she was the cause of her death to begin with. But Anna's act of self-sacrifice summarizes the essence of all inner healing: forgiveness. By Anna's act of forgiveness, she opens the doorway for Elsa to begin forgiving herself. All healing is an act of forgiveness, just as all forgiveness is a release from the past. Only forgiveness can melt a frozen heart, because forgiveness is the ultimate act of love. So there you have it. The story of Frozen is really a message of forgiveness, healing the shadow and coming to complete peace and acceptance of self. All self-rejection begins with a simple wish to be something other than what you are. And this is inauthenticity in a nutshell. The mind creates these mental images of who it would like us to be instead. And as long as we cherish these self-images, we continue to create our own internal hell. But authenticity happens when the outer self becomes a perfect reflection of the inner self. No more self-denial or rejection, but perfect self-acceptance. So as often as you feel triggered to anger or fear or self-disdain, remember that you always have the choice to look upon that part of yourself with hate or with love, and only love can heal. So begin to see each part of yourself with love, but don't get involved with what the mind has to say about it. There is no part of you that is wrong or evil or broken. It's simply a part of yourself that is lost, confused, and afraid. So self-love is really just self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is authenticity. And this is the only way to transcend self-rejection and escape from every trap of the mind. So while you are healing, always remember the wise words of Master Olaf. Love it, but don't touch it.